One Question is brought to you by Turnkey Search, a top industry search firm since 1996.
What's the best possible scenario for the league and its members come 2019 for the linear effort? And we've seen some people already extrapolate some data and some financial numbers. I think Clay Travis did this. David Teal may have done this, where they're talking about, $7 million to $8 million per school. What do you see as the best possible scenario come 2019?
The best possible scenario is that they get full distribution, and they get full distribution by flipping like ESPN News. In 3 years, the purpose of ESPN News is probably obsolete if you really think about it. So they'll probably flip one of those networks. They'll get max distribution. Then the other thing that'll probably help itself out by 2020, or maybe even by 2019, they put a very valuable property on the ACC network in order to make those cable operators bite. The best scenario is something that a colleague of mine, Wes Durham, pointed out with the SEC network. Remember, they had Tennessee, Florida, which was one of the first SEC network games. You got to remember that Tennessee and Florida a couple of years ago weren't exactly on top. They were still rebuilding, but that fan base really cares about that game. And there was no way that they were going to miss that game. Two big schools with two big fan bases, and that game really matters. So they were wise to put the SEC network front and center for Florida, Georgia. So the ACC, the audience has to remember that while football is on the upswing, they're going to be really great this upcoming season. Where their real bread and butter is made is during the basketball season. ESPN really values that Duke-Carolina game. In a lot of ways, I've always made this point, the Duke-Carolina game is the unofficial start to the basketball season, to the college basketball season for a lot of fans. You got to think of it as Christmas Day for the NBA. I call it casual NBA fan. That's casual NBA fans' first game of the season. Well, Carolina-Duke is probably the casual college basketball fans' first real college basketball game after they come up for air from the football and the Super Bowl. So I wouldn't be shocked if ESPN decides, because they own all the games, they decide by 2020 when they get away from the Raycom Fox Sports deal that they put one of those Duke-Carolina games on the ACC network. My guess would be they would put that first game, that February game, in that late February game on the ACC network, and then the season finale, which is always Duke-Carolina that weekend, that final weekend of college hoops, they would put that back on ESPN or ESPN2. So that would be the best case scenario to maximize that. The other part of this is the streaming availability. When I talked to Skipper on Thursday, he was very, very open about the fact that they have been testing the waters for these over-the-top options. I point to the cricket package that they sold, I think, 2 years ago for like $100. They were very successful with that. So I wouldn't be surprised that in the future for some of these Olympic sports, like say ACC baseball, which has a very hardcore niche audience, for the ACC options to give you like all the games through ACC Network Extra, that you would pay a nominal fee to get all those games. I point to two sports that are not basketball and football to get people to pay money because they're a motivated niche audience. At least, I think. I mean, I could be wrong about this. Obviously, the market will bear itself out. But I think ACC baseball and lacrosse are the two sports in which you could put on an ACC Network Extra and charge for it if you gave everybody the option to watch all the games. So I think that's something to look at in the future, would be a best-case scenario. Because, look, you and I both know, Matt, that the world is changing and a lot more people are watching their stuff on iPhones, on iPads, or laptops, or connected devices to their TV, Apple TV, Roku, Fire Sticks, everything else. I'll talk to, I'll use this example. When I was at the ACC tournament, Ron Morris, who is a very, very established columnist for the state in South Carolina, was listening to me talk to Heath Klein from the Columbia Radio ESPN affiliate down there. And he said, this is what he said to me. He's like, as you were talking to Heath, all I heard was my younger son telling me how old I was because I still watched cable. Think about that. So I think Dean Jordan referred to those people as cord nevers. There is the optimism that the cord nevers eventually package on cable deals as they get older. As more and more people are used to not having cable, I think that gets less and less and less. So by 2019, 2020, I think that's where that's where the play would have to be, charging you for an all-you-can-eat option for like baseball and lacrosse.
So we do have one example within the Power Five leagues of a network that didn't achieve scale as quickly as they would have liked, and many would argue they haven't achieved the scale that they want, period, because they don't have a deal with DirecTV yet. And there are different dynamics in play with the Pac-12 networks than there are with what ESPN and the ACC are going to do. But what's the worst case scenario? If this bears out to only put $1 million to $3 million, and I'm just using hypothetical numbers here, back in the pockets of every league member, what are we going to hear the narrative be then? And overall, what I think I know what your considerable worry is here, but how do you think an underappreciated network linear play come 2019 will be responded to by leadership?
Well, here's the thing. The one thing that people have to remember about the ACC is that they always sandbag. They're not the SEC network. They're not the Big 12. They're certainly not the Big 10, where all they do is they talk about projections, okay? Projections are just that. You don't know what they're ultimately going to be. They could come under. They could come, look at the Pac-12. I think you were alluding to the Pac-12 there for a moment. I think it was Washington's AD a couple weeks ago had kind of was basically caught, essentially, thinking, all right, we estimated that we're going to make like $8 million per this Pac-12 deal. Instead, they ended up getting, if my number is correct, like 1.5 from the Pac-12, which was far under what their projections were. So keep in mind, if you look at the history of the ACC and how they talk about their financials, and David Teal probably has a better database of these things from the Daily Press, every single time the tax records come in, the ACC gets more money than they projected. Always, like without fail. That's because they sandbag. They do that on purpose. So I think it's I think it's worthless to get into and this is not in any way me disrespecting Clay Travis or anybody else that wants to project what these numbers are going to be. We don't know, man. I mean, we just don't know. So I got the confidence in the ACC that they kind of have an idea what's going to be, and their numbers will be more in line with what the SEC network is getting, more so than anything else. The Big Ten is a different factor because they own like 50% or 49% of their Big Ten network. So they're always going to be making more money at the end of the day. And then I'll close this statement with this. The money matters only so much, okay? You can pull in as much money as you want. The important part is that you're not going to go extinct. You're not going to be like the Big 12 that can't seem to get its act together. That you're not going to be in the Pac-12 situation owning your own network, which if they stay with it, you and I have kind of had this conversation, if they stay with it, it might work for them in the long run since they own it and they're not tied to ESPN in their future. But again, we don't know that. The important part for the ACC is that at least they're not in a position where they have to worry about things until 2036. And the buried lead with all of this, too, besides the network, is that Notre Dame is tied to the ACC through at least 2036. And we don't know. 20 years is a long time. I'm going to be 57 in 20 years, man. I don't know what's going to happen. So who's to say that Notre Dame doesn't eventually join the ACC? What do you think that's going to do for their television package in the long run? You would suspect that it would go up in a big way because that Notre Dame is such a brand. So those are all things to keep in mind in the long run. And the other thing to keep in mind in the long run, too, and again, you always have to kind of like play this out into the future, that the ACC doesn't have to answer rumors anymore. There was one comment that was made by people like about, I think it was about John Swofford, the ACC commissioner. Think about this. What does John Swofford have to worry about now between now and 2036, other than scandal, other than his schools getting in trouble? No more no more the Louisvilles, no more North Carolina, no more Syracuse. He doesn't have to answer the TV question anymore. He doesn't have to answer any questions about schools leaving. The ACC is fine. That's the biggest play, and that's why this network thing was so important, regardless of what these numbers might be in the long run.
Do you expect the league football schedule to move to 9 games by 2019?
Yeah, it has to. I think everybody's going to move to 9. I think it's all a wave coming at them that they're just going to have to deal with. The only twist to this is Notre Dame. The only way that I could see the league going into like a pod format, getting rid of divisions, or keeping at 8 games is if Notre Dame joins the league, and Notre Dame's going to want their non-conference slate to continue as is. I mean, they have their rivalry games that they want to keep. That's going to be very difficult to do in a 9-game league schedule if Notre Dame joins full time. That's the only thing that I would look at going forward.
When do you expect we will actually come to know the financial details of this deal?
Not till the tax records come out. I mean, I think David Teal confirmed the long-standing channel clause rumor that West Durham had speculated on for the last year or so.
Yeah.
It is kind of funny that it actually had a name to it. I think it's hilarious that John Swofford, when I asked him point blank about it back in March or April, he completely just avoided the question altogether. And yeah, turns out there was some sort of channel clause that's going to pay the league a lot of money in the meantime until the ACC network happens. And then we don't know what that channel clause is, but we'll find out once the tax records come out, which gets back to my original point about the league. They sandbag. They're going to be fine in the grand scheme.
And that's today's One Question, brought to you by Turnkey Search, a top industry search firm since 1996. One Question is designed to give D1 Ticker subscribers valuable insights on how executive leaders in college athletics think about key issues on their respective campuses, in their departments, or within their leagues and conferences. One Question is brought to you by Turnkey Search, a top industry search firm since 1996.